He was just the janitor. No one knew his name. No one cared, until the CEO mocked him in front of everyone and dared him to play Chopin, and promised to marry him if he could. What happened next silenced the entire room and changed both their lives forever. If you believe in second chances, unseen talent, and stories that touch the soul, stick with this one till the end, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories like this. Everyone knew him as the janitor. Just the janitor. He wore the same faded khaki uniform every day, pushing a mop down polished marble floors while guests glided past him without a second glance. The chandeliers sparkled above him, casting his shadow on walls he would never own, under ceilings too high for someone like him to touch. But David didn't complain. He smiled when spoken to, nodded when dismissed, and stayed late to clean after the parties had ended and the lights had dimmed. To them he was invisible. But to the grand piano in the corner of the hotel lobby, the one no one ever really played, he was something else. Every night, when the guests disappeared and silence took over, David would drift toward the Steinway like a man returning to a long-lost friend. He would run his rag over its black frame like he was dusting off a memory. And sometimes, if no one was watching, his fingers would hover above the keys, never pressing down but remembering. Always remembering. That piano didn't see a janitor. It saw someone who once knew how to make it sing. The story you're about to hear isn't just about music. It's about being unseen, unheard, and what happens when one person dares to look a little closer. Before we dive in deeper, if you believe that no one is ever truly ordinary, that behind every uniform might be a story waiting to be heard, then take a second to like this video. One small click helps us keep telling stories that matter. Now, what changed everything for David wasn't fate. It was a woman with high heels, sharp eyes, and a cruel mouth. Her name? Veronica Langford. Veronica Langford didn't just walk into a room, she claimed it. The red soles of her stilettos clicked across the marble like punctuation marks to a sentence only she could write. As the CEO of one of the most luxurious hotel chains in the country, she was used to being noticed, obeyed, and feared. Her hair was always immaculate, her tone clipped and cold, and her smile, when it appeared, was the kind that made people nervous. During one of her unannounced inspections at the flagship hotel, she swept through the lobby like a storm in designer silk, pointing out flaws that didn't exist and ordering changes that didn't matter. To her, efficiency was everything. People were just furniture that talked. That night, as she prepared to leave, she noticed David near the piano. He wasn't cleaning it. He was just standing there, eyes closed, humming something soft and haunting. She paused, one eyebrow arching. "Do you even know what that is?" she asked, voice dripping with amusement. David opened his eyes slowly and replied, "Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major." The confidence in his tone made her laugh out loud, a sharp, cruel sound that bounced off the marble walls. "If you can actually play Chopin," she smirked, "I'll marry you." Then she turned and walked away, assuming she had ended the conversation with a joke meant to humiliate. But what she didn't know was that her words didn't land like a joke. They landed like a challenge. A doorway. A spark. You're going to want to hear how this unfolds. But before we get to that moment, before the keys were touched and the room went silent, please hit the like button if you've ever been underestimated, laughed at, or challenged to prove your worth. This story is for you. And it's only just getting started. That night, long after Veronica's heels had stopped echoing through the lobby, David stood by the piano in the dark. Her words clung to him like smoke. "If you can actually play Chopin, I'll marry you." She said it like it was absurd, impossible, a joke to be discarded with the trash he emptied every night. But David didn't laugh. He hadn't laughed in years. He sat on the piano bench, not to play, not yet, but to remember. His fingers hovered over the keys, and for the first time in a very long time he pressed one. A single note bloomed in the empty lobby, soft but sharp, like a memory that refused to stay buried. David once lived in another world, one filled with concert halls, conservatories, and applause. He was a child prodigy with a scholarship in Europe and a future the world seemed eager to hear. Until the car crash. Until the loss. Until the silence swallowed him whole. Music had once been his language, his soul. But life had ripped it from him, piece by piece, until all that remained was a rag and a mop. Still, that night something shifted. Her mockery wasn't just cruelty, it was a crack in a wall he had accepted for far too long. And in that crack, a sliver of light. He didn't want Veronica. He didn't even want revenge. He wanted to remember who he had been. He wanted to see if he still existed beneath the khaki uniform. If this story has touched something inside you already, if you've ever buried a part of yourself to survive, then like this video. Support stories that give people like David a voice. because the music was no longer just in his memory. It was coming back, one note at a time. The next morning, David arrived at the hotel 2 hours earlier than usual. He made sure the lobby was empty. No guests. No staff. Just him and the grand piano, silently waiting in the corner like it always did. But today was different. Today it wasn't just a beautiful piece of furniture to be dusted. Today it was an old friend he was daring to greet after years of silence. His fingers trembled as he lifted the lid. He sat down slowly, adjusting the bench like he used to in the conservatory halls. At first the keys felt foreign, stiff. His muscles resisted. His memory faltered. The melody stumbled. But he didn't stop. Day after day he returned, earlier than the rest, quieter than the world around him, always alone. And each time his hands remembered a little more. Notes that once seemed unreachable began to return like birds finding their way home. He played softly at first, just enough to feel the music breathe again. Then stronger. Fuller. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major wasn't just a piece anymore. It was a resurrection. It was sorrow and healing stitched into every measure. It was all the things he never said. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing. He didn't need applause or validation. He just needed to know that the part of him that was lost hadn't died. He was reclaiming himself in the quiet, note by note. And somewhere deep inside he knew, the moment would come when he'd play not just for himself, but for the world that forgot him. If this chapter moved you, if you believe in second chances, in redemption through silent persistence, please like this video. Your support fuels stories of quiet courage like David's. Because even in the shadows, greatness never really disappears. It waits. A week passed. David kept practicing in silence, the early mornings becoming sacred. What began as hesitant trial runs were now fluid, emotional rehearsals. Every key pressed was a memory reclaimed, every chord a conversation with the man he used to be. Then came the night of the fundraiser. The hotel lobby was transformed, crystal chandeliers sparkled above rows of guests in gowns and tuxedos. Waiters floated with silver trays, cameras flashed, and a string of executives lined up for photographs beside Veronica Langford herself. It was a night built on perfection, image and money. But perfection cracked when the jazz trio scheduled to perform sent a last-minute cancellation. The baby grand Steinway stood untouched in the corner, draped in awkward silence, a gap in the carefully curated ambience. Veronica was not pleased. Her eyes darted across the room, calculating, irritated. In the background David watched. And then he moved. Slowly, almost invisibly, he removed his gloves, folded his apron, and walked toward the piano. At first no one paid him attention. He was just the janitor, probably there to adjust something or move the bench. But then he sat down. His back straightened. His hands hovered. And the first few notes of Chopin spilled into the room like whispered truth. The music cut through the clinking of glasses and idle chatter. Heads turned. Voices dropped. Conversations died mid-sentence. People froze, not because of who he was but because of what they were hearing. Music that didn't just sound beautiful but felt like it had something to say. Something ancient. Something human. Veronica turned, her eyes locking on the man she once mocked. And he, without a single word, was about to answer her dare. If you're still here, still feeling this, take a second and like the video. Because the moment we've all been waiting for has just begun. As David's fingers moved across the keys, the room transformed. The opulence of the hotel faded into the background. The glittering gowns, the tailored suits, the carefully poured champagne, all of it became irrelevant. What mattered now was the sound, the raw, aching beauty of Chopin played by hands that had known both brilliance and despair. Each note was drenched in something more than skill. It was sorrow remembered, dignity reclaimed. His playing wasn't showy or dramatic, it was honest, vulnerable. And it made people stop breathing for a moment. One woman near the bar placed her glass down with trembling fingers. A man beside her leaned forward as if pulled by invisible threads. Veronica didn't move. She stood frozen, her expression unreadable. The janitor she had mocked was now commanding the entire room, without status, without title, without saying a single word. Just music. Just truth. The Chopin Nocturne unfolded like a story that had waited too long to be told. There was a kind of sacredness in the air, the way people looked at him, not with pity but reverence. For the first time in years David felt seen. Not as a cleaner. Not as a ghost of potential. But as a musician. An artist. A soul who never truly stopped playing even when life gave him every reason to. And as the final note hovered in the air before dissolving into silence, the entire room seemed to hold its breath, unwilling to let it end. If you felt that moment, If you could picture that lobby melting into a cathedral of emotion, then please like this video. Support this story not because it's flawless but because it's real. Because sometimes, one quiet performance can silence a lifetime of being ignored. For a moment, no one moved. The silence after the final note was heavier than the music itself, as though the room feared breaking the fragile beauty that lingered in the air. Then, softly at first, came the sound of clapping. It began with a single pair of hands near the back, then grew, hesitant, then certain, then thunderous. The applause filled the lobby like rain after drought. People stood, overcome by something they couldn't quite name. Some wiped away tears they didn't expect. Others looked around, silently wondering how they had never noticed the man behind the music. But David didn't bask in the recognition. He stood up quietly, his expression calm, almost detached. He bowed slightly, not to impress but out of respect, for the music, for the moment, for himself. Then he turned away and walked back toward the shadows, just as he had come. He didn't look for approval. He wasn't searching for Veronica's face in the crowd. Because this was never about her. It was never about the promise she made as a joke. It was about proving to himself that the music had never left. That he had never truly disappeared. The applause was loud, yes, but it wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that he had played. He had answered the challenge not with arrogance or revenge but with grace. And in that grace he found freedom. If this part of the story left you with goosebumps, if you've ever done something not for validation but because it was who you are, then pause and like this video right now. These moments remind us that worth isn't something given. It's something remembered. And David had finally remembered his. The world at last was listening. Veronica Langford had always prided herself on control. Control of her image, her company, her emotions. But in that moment, as the final notes of Chopin dissolved into the hush of the lobby, she found herself standing still, speechless. Her face, usually so composed and unreadable, now carried something unfamiliar. It wasn't just surprise. It was disorientation, disbelief, and something that looked very close to shame. This wasn't supposed to happen. The janitor was supposed to nod awkwardly, laugh nervously, and go back to mopping floors. He wasn't supposed to sit down and transform into someone who could hold an entire ballroom captive with nothing but his hands and a song. She watched as David walked away from the piano, not seeking praise, not expecting her acknowledgement. He didn't even glance at her. That struck her harder than she expected. Because for the first time in years, Veronica Langford wasn't the center of attention. She wasn't in control. And worst of all, she had misjudged someone so completely that it unsettled the foundation she had built her authority on. She found herself walking toward him, not with the same commanding stride she was known for, but with quiet, unsure steps. When she finally reached him, her voice was small. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" she asked. David looked at her with the calm of a man who had already said everything he needed to say. "No one ever asked," he replied. Those 4 words landed like a stone in her chest. No one ever asked. The lobby buzzed behind them with voices trying to process what they had just witnessed. But in that small corner, 2 people stood facing something deeper than status. If this exchange struck you, if you've ever longed for someone to just ask to see you, like this video, it means more than you think. Veronica didn't know what she expected to feel, pity perhaps or embarrassment. But what she felt instead was humility. And a kind of awe she hadn't experienced in years. David didn't beg for her attention. He didn't revel in her discomfort. He simply stood there with quiet dignity, completely at peace with what he had just done. That unnerved her more than anything. She, the woman who had built an empire on elegance and intimidation, found herself wondering how many other people like David she had walked past in her life. How many gifts she had ignored because they weren't dressed in silk or seated in boardrooms. She took a deep breath and did something she wasn't known for. She extended her hand not as a CEO but as a human being. "We could use a resident pianist," she said softly. "Full-time. If you'd want that." David looked at her, searching her face for sarcasm. He found none. Just sincerity wrapped in awkwardness. After a pause he nodded. "Not for you," he said gently. "For the music." That answer told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't accepting out of need. He was accepting because it was time to reclaim what life had stolen. The next day, David came to work not in a khaki uniform but in a black suit. Not with a mop in his hand but sheet music under his arm. The hotel lobby didn't just gain a musician, it gained soul. And the piano? It was no longer silent. If you believe in late beginnings, in the idea that some people bloom again even after being stepped on, please like this video. Your support helps stories like David's reach hearts that might need them most. Because sometimes all it takes to change a life is for someone to finally listen. The hotel guests began to notice. Not just the music, but the man who played it. They asked about him at the front desk. Who was he? Where had he trained? Some assumed he must have been flown in from Europe, maybe once famous. Others whispered that he had the soul of a poet, the touch of someone who had lived many lifetimes. But no one guessed the truth. No one realized that just a week ago, he had been sweeping the very floors they now walked across in heels and polished shoes. David didn't correct them. He didn't need to. He let the piano speak for him. He played during morning check-ins, evening receptions, Sunday brunches. And every note told a story, some of grief, some of grace, all of them real. The music wasn't background anymore. It was the heartbeat of the hotel. Guests paused mid-conversation to listen. Staff slowed their pace when they passed the lobby. Even Veronica, now softened and quieter, found herself drawn to the piano bench. Sometimes she'd sit nearby, not speaking, just listening with her eyes closed, like she was trying to understand something she'd missed for years. David never spoke much. He didn't need to. But what changed everything wasn't just the way he played. It was the way he made people feel. In a place built on luxury and image, he brought depth, warmth, humanity. And the staff who used to call him the janitor, now addressed him with respect. Mr. David, Sir Maestro. If this transformation inspired you, if it reminded you that every person you pass has a story, a gift, a buried light, then hit that like button. Show the world that you believe in unseen brilliance. Because David wasn't just playing music. He was finally being heard. Veronica Langford had never been the apologizing type. In her world, vulnerability was weakness, and weakness was never an option. But something had shifted in her, something deep, uncomfortable, necessary. She began to sit near the piano more often, not in power but in silence. She didn't issue grand speeches or make public gestures. She didn't even bring up that night, the night she mocked him, the night he stunned her into silence. But her presence spoke volumes. Some evenings, when David played softer melodies, Veronica would place her phone face down, close her eyes and simply listen. No meetings, no commands, no judgment. Just stillness. One night, after everyone had gone and only the low hum of the city remained outside the lobby's glass walls, she approached him. Her expression was softer, her usual edge replaced with something unfamiliar. "What you did that night," she started, but the words trailed off. David looked up from the keys, his eyes kind. He said nothing. He didn't need to. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening, then simply sat beside him on the bench. For a moment, the woman who ruled towers of glass and gold sat beside the man who once scrubbed their floors, and they were equals. Not in wealth, not in titles, but in understanding. There are moments when apologies don't come in the form of words, but in changed behavior, in quiet presence, in learning how to listen. Veronica had once dared him to prove himself. He had. And now she wasn't seeking forgiveness, she was earning it. If this moment made your heart feel something real, take a moment and like this video. Because sometimes redemption isn't loud. It's found in two people sharing silence at a piano bench, and in the courage to show up differently the second time. Months passed and the hotel began to feel different. Not just in decor or service, but in spirit. Guests wrote reviews not only about the luxurious suites or five-star dining, but about the man who played the piano in the lobby each evening. Some described his music as healing. Others called it haunting. A few simply said they didn't know why they cried when he played, only that they did. David never chased recognition. He didn't care about being famous. He didn't want headlines or interviews. All he ever wanted was to feel whole again, to wake up and know that the most sacred part of himself hadn't been lost to time, tragedy, or circumstance. And he had found that. Every note he played stitched together the broken pages of his past. Every applause was an echo that he belonged. And the piano? It had never truly been silent, that it had simply been waiting for him. Veronica continued to visit, not out of guilt, but because she needed the music too. They never became lovers. That wasn't the story. Their connection ran deeper than that. It was about respect, redemption, and two people learning that not all debts are paid in dollars or deals. Some are repaid by becoming better. One evening, a small sign appeared next to the Steinway: David, resident pianist. Formerly our janitor. Forever our maestro. It wasn't flashy. It was honest. And those who stopped to read it felt something stir in their chest. Because this story, his story, wasn't just about a man who could play Chopin. It was about every soul who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or forgotten. If you made it to the end of this story, you're not just a viewer, you're part of something meaningful. Please like this video to honor every silent talent waiting to be heard. Let's keep listening.